Welcome to another episode of The Rabbi and the Therapist. Bruce, the other day, Miriam from Baltimore emailed us the following question. Mm-hmm. What is the difference between a psychiatrist, psychologist, and therapist?
Okay, so simply put, there are two kinds of methods that we use to help people. One is called talk therapy, where you go and you speak to someone. The other is medication. The only individual that can give medication is a psychiatrist because we've gone to medical school. Outside of that, talk psychotherapy or a psychotherapist can come from any educational background. They can be a psychiatrist or have an MD, a psychologist and have a PhD, a social worker. Essentially, all of these mental health professionals can do talk therapy. The only exception is a psychiatrist who can also prescribe medicine. I should point out there is one other type of psychotherapist. They're called an LMFT, Licensed Marital and Family Therapist. It's a special track for people who want to go and specifically specialize in helping couples and family in therapy.
When you say talk therapy, is it the talking? Is it more the interaction? Is it the listening? Is it the rapport? When you say, I'm not sure when you say talk therapy, are they going to a lecture? Or they're basically going to, you say talk versus medication. So, hi, you come into the office, what's your problem? We now discuss and then figure out what to do only with talking, with not any...
You bring up two separate things, really. One is like, how many different kinds of talk therapy are there? There's a book about that thick that lists a description of there are many different kinds. But not for nothing, there's also group therapy. So sometimes it's not you just going, but you're sitting in a group, right? But then you brought up the second one. It's like, what is it that happens in the talk therapy that actually is effective? That's the $1 million question, really. I mean, I think another time you and I should devote an entire episode to listening, because it may just be the power of listening in terms of the talk therapy.
So when you use the terminology talk therapy, you mean talk therapy versus medication?
Correct.
Okay. Right. Medication, only a psychiatrist gives because they're a doctor, medical doctor.
Correct.
And therefore they went to how many years of schooling? 8, 10,
12 to 14,
12, 14 years, because he had the internships and all the other stuff.
Right.
And a therapist or psychologist, we're talking about much fewer years.
Well, it can range, at the most 9 years and all the way down. By the way, it just occurred to me, how long does it take to become a rabbi?
Well, again, if it depends what you talk about the rabbi. If you talk about just a test for the smicha, that's usually between a year or two. But you have to remember, there's so many things that you need to know or need to have under your belt before you become a rabbi. You can't learn the Shulchan Aruch before you learn a certain amount of Talmud and a certain amount of Mishnah and a certain amount of Chumash, etc. So I guess it's, a lifetime's. But the actual learning just to become a rabbi, most smicha programs are about a year's length.
Assuming that your education growing up has been a religious education, correct?
Right. And then you're aware of also there are different types when you say rabbi. What is a rabbi? People often ask me, what type of rabbi are you? I say, I'm a political rabbi. What does that mean? Well, there are different categories. A rabbi, and then you have a rav, a person who is halachic and an authority, and right? Then you have a dayan, right? So a dayan is a judge. So I think the terminology rabbi, or translation is basically rabbi, is a teacher. Mm-hmm. Anybody who teaches or takes a public approach and a public position will call rabbi.
Rabbi, the one personage, I'll call it, in Judaism, which I think most resembles what we do in mental health, is this term which I learned for the first time through Lubavitchers and Chabad. I'd never heard it before. And it's this concept of a mashpia. What is a mashpia?
Okay, so first of all, I think Mashpia is a terminology that's exclusive to Chabad, but there are in other circles, they have different names and bells. They have a person who is somewhat an authority over a particular group in square. There are different positions that they may call them, again, with different, the title is not important. The important thing is, particularly in the Hasidic dynasties, they will have somewhat of a big brother system, an advisor system, and that you would have, again, different terminology. Some that you can go to for advice, simply what we call practical living advice that you need to speak to.
About even personal issues?
Yeah. Yes, often about the personal issues.
Is there a Mashpia school?
There's no Mashpia school, which may be a disadvantage, and often people who really should be a Mashpia take that position, shy away from that position. Today we have something within the therapy world, a new terminology, which is a coach. What is a coach person? As a person with, hopefully, with some common sense, has a little bit of training, and really no real training as far as how to give advice, as much as, I should say, not the advice they give, but sort of a method of how to give that advice. We know that a coach really doesn't have any schooling, and
they also don't have any credentials. Yeah, so they... Right.
Okay, so often a Mashpia doesn't have credentials. When person comes to me about a problem. A young lady came to me the other day and had to make a decision. She was in the dating process and said, listen, I need some advice. And she knows that I have some experience in that area. I don't want to call myself a dating expert, but within the system, I've written a booklet on dating. And so she came to me. And she says, at one point, she said to me, my Mashpia told me. The first question I said is, how old is your Mashpia? Oh, this is a girl, 22, sitting in front of me. She said, my Mashpia is 23. I said, and is she married? She said, yes. How long? For a year's time. I said, Mamala, that's not what you should be sitting for. When the Rabbi spoke about concept of Mashpia, a woman who is just one step ahead of you to advise you. Now, I'm not saying that she is not qualified to advise you, but obviously you're coming to me because the advice didn't work out one way or another.
But like how, so that's my question. And then we'll take it from the perspective of mental health professionals, but how do you know who to go to? Like, why would she pick a Mashpia who's only 1 year older than she was? Did someone tell her to go to her, or how does that happen?
I'm going to answer, but I'm also going to ask you the same question. How do I pick a therapist?
I'm ready.
And how do
I can feel the seat getting hotter with every second.
Yeah. So in her case, I said, how did you meet her? She says, well, she was my dorm counselor when I was in seminary. I said, look, again, I'm not going to talk about the qualifications, but I'm not sure that that's what the Rebbe, when he introduced the concept of Aseh L'Charav, which is a concept goes back all the way to the time of the Talmud, that you have to have a teacher, you have to have a mentor. Everyone needs a mentor. You know, one of the things that we talk in therapy, no one can do it alone. We always need help. And perhaps in the shtetl, we relied on our parents more. Today we don't. We relied on our city, our shtetl rabbi more.
Your smaller community, sure. Yeah.
And remember, and that shtetl rabbi was a psychiatrist. Well, he couldn't give medication, but he was a psychologist, and he really understood the family structure and the particular person.
Right.
Remember something, when a therapist has someone come to them, how many sessions does it take before they get to know that particular person? You know, what do I know about the Hecht family? What do I know about the dynamics? What can I know about his father, mother? That takes many, many sessions, and sometimes a lot of money is spent until we actually get to the heart of the matter and the issue that we're dealing with.
So getting back to the issue of the Mashpia, which is really interesting, because it reminds me of a similar concept in addiction. The approach which has been shown to be the most successful by far in the treatment of addiction is the 12-step program. Yes. And in the 12-step program, an individual is supposed to have a sponsor, which it sounds like the role of the sponsor to addiction is parallels to this to the role of a mashpia.
Perhaps it does, and the one thing what the sponsor basically has is experience. The Talmud tells us, "Ein chacham kebal hanasayon." There is no wiser person than the person who lived through that particular episode, that particular experience. And therefore, you go to someone who was a little bit older and has some experience and can say, "Listen, you know what, young man, young lady, I've gone through, I struggled with some of those same struggles when I was a teenager. I struggled those things first in my first year of marriage. Some of the things that we know are going to be challenging times." But I think the real, again, maybe as a rabbi, and that's why I think the more important question is, how do I look for a therapist? And how do I know when I found the right therapist? Maybe finding that therapist is like a shidduch. You know it's the right one when it's the right one. But the real question is like this. Yeah. Somebody calls me up and says, "Hey, I have a problem with my son. And he's doing something that I think is inappropriate." Because often what I say is it age appropriate or not?
Okay. So really what you're asking is, how do you find, I asked you, how does someone find a mashpia? And you're asking, how does someone find an appropriate psychotherapist? Before the days of the internet, and certainly before the pandemic, it was mostly done through referrals. You either knew someone who could reliably refer you to someone who was competent, who could help you, pardon me, or you'd go to your primary care physician, and your primary care physician could then subsequently make that referral to the appropriate.
I want to stay a moment with that primary care physician. I think it's very, very important. And I'm a person, as it happens, I talk very, very often and tell particularly colleagues of mine, when's the last time? Did you go for your annual checkup? It's very, very important. Often that is a very, very important place to start with. Your doctor can usually give you, and they can also tell you if they think it's medical and therefore I need a psychiatrist like Dr. Bruce, or I need a therapist. It's something that talk therapy is going to work, and therefore I can go to a therapist. And often and by the way, I believe in a good rabbi, a physician, a rabbi person, not the halachic authority necessarily, not the dayan, but the rabbi, meaning the activist, the person who is basically interviewing people and advising people, will also recognize sometimes, and should recognize, that, you know what, you're dealing with something that you need long-term therapy. But there's a very big difference between the rabbis and the therapists. And that is, the rabbis, we feel, I'm not sure we're right, but we feel we have the right to tell the person what to do. You as a psychiatrist, would you advise? Would you tell the person what to do? If they ask you about a particular question.
I was at a conference, very, very smart, taught by a very, very smart psychologist. And he asked that very same question. The audience, we were 200 psychotherapists of different backgrounds, psychiatrists, psychologists, psychotherapists. Essentially asked the same question, said, who controls what you talk about? Who guides the session? Is it you, the therapist, or is it the patient? And nearly everyone answered and raised their hand. He took a vote. Nearly everyone voted that it's the patient, because that's what we were taught. We're taught that not to be paternalistic, right? That the patient needs to guide. But it is completely false. It is always us leading the session, even if we don't want to admit it. Even if we don't want to admit it.
But
that has a history I won't go way back into Freud, where it's almost a caricature. It was almost a joke that someone would go for these therapy sessions, lay on a couch or a sofa and talk, and the therapist wouldn't say anything. I mean, just that could drive you crazy. But at any rate, fortunately, we don't do that anymore. But
that is a form of therapy, by the way, where the therapist just listens, doesn't say one word.
Well, I won't get into details about that, but we have no evidence that was all helpful. But no, more increasingly today, I understand why you asked the question. That's the way it used to be. But increasingly, therapists are much more willing to give advice and express their opinions.
And there's still a big difference with the rabbi, because to the rabbi, we believe that we have an achrayus, we have a responsibility to guide that person. So if a person comes and they say, like, for instance, if a person comes to a psychiatrist and say they're going to harm themselves, you're going to call the authorities, right?
True.
Or harm somebody else, you're going to call authorities. We look at it a little bit on a spiritual level as well. If you're going to harm yourself, I'm going to go out and sin. I'm going to go out and get somebody else to sin. I have a moral, or I should say, a divine responsibility to God as my position of rabbi to tell that person what's best and to tell that person not to do something that's going to be harmful to their soul as they're going to be to the body.
I think up to this point where, I mean, for you, from your explanation, that imperative is coming from above. For us, the imperative is coming from the law, because if we don't do something when someone's a danger to themselves or others, we are legally liable. But it doesn't matter. I think, as I see it, where you have an advantage, and where I think what I do needs to work more with what you do, is that what we can do is we can bring the person to the place where they're having relief from whatever's immediately distressing them. But then, so they've cleared this space in their house, which previously had been cluttered with depression or anxiety or anger or discord, whatever it is. We've cleared the clutter out, and now they want to redecorate, right? They want a new life. They want a better life. And that's what in mental health in general, psychotherapy is really unable to offer. There is one branch of it called positive psychology, but it's not offering anything on a spiritual level. Essentially, it's just trying to infuse more positivity into the process. But I think that really what needs to happen is there needs to be a handoff. Not that every person who comes for psychotherapy is going to be open to something like that. But another way of, in short, of explaining what I just said, or characterizing what I just said, is what we do is definitely from lemata lelemala. What you do is, I'm not saying you don't do that as well, we all need to do it, but you can offer lemala to lemata. And those are very, very critical entry points, because in my experience, when a person is coming out of a moment of hardship or distress, that's the opportunity that person has for spiritual transcendence right at that moment.
I wonder sometimes when you have great therapists, psychotherapists, psychiatrists or psychologists that are also rabbis, and they wear both those hats. On one hand, they say, I am here to teach, I'm here to guide, I am here to really encourage you, because that's really a job of a rabbi, is not only to tell him what to do. Often the person knows what to do before he got into your office.
Sure.
The question is giving them that inspiration, giving them the fire to get the job done, versus to a situation where we open up the possibilities, we get the person to really think through what are some of their options and allow them to choose themselves.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Rabbi, I've thought about this question quite a lot. I've also encountered...
You're thinking of becoming a rabbi, is that it?
Halavai, but I don't think I have enough time for that. But what I will say is that, and I've also met clergy, rabbis also in other religions that have gone back and gotten mental health training. I think they need to be kept separate. I think that number one, individuals are more reluctant to reveal the types of personal information, some of which is extremely embarrassing to them. They're more reluctant to reveal that to a clergy person. And number two, I believe that the innate reverence, which at least every Jew has towards a rabbi, needs to be preserved. And there's something in that reverence and in that relationship alone, before anyone's opened their mouth, that I believe needs to be special and separate from that purely bottom-up approach.
But remember, there are often times that the person has to ask the rabbi a very personal question and also give very, very personal information, particularly sometimes when you're talking about tshuva, a way how to return for the past doings. So if I've sinned in a particular area, and sometimes just to get guidance The rabbi doesn't have to know any details. Often when people come, I say, I don't want to know the details. I got my own problems.
No, I hear it.
But we need to be able to carve out what we call a derech, a path within teshuvah, within the return.
Which involves those personal things. I think our viewers need to know that if they have questions about who they should see personally, we're not going to be able to answer those questions. However, I do think that it would be helpful for the viewers to know that we will make available in the description underneath the video, this description section where they can download a PDF which describes the various levels of psychotherapists as well as the various levels within the rabbinic community, so that they will probably have a better idea about who they can turn to.
But one thing is for sure, if you're going to the therapist and that therapist does not feel like the right person, today there are so many therapists out there, what we refer to as Shomrei Torah mitzvahs, that are orthodox, particularly in a place like New York and tri-state area. And likewise, not every rabbi does the job a great job. And if the rabbi, you had a bad experience, choose another rabbi. If you had a bad with the guidance, if it's a coach or Mashpia, you know what? Choose somebody else. You're not stuck in with that person just because he's your community, he lives in your community, or with somehow a relationship that you started. You can very, very easily choose, as you can change your doctor, you can change your rabbi. Of course, you're not doing shopping. You're going with an open mind in a way that you're going to get to a result that you're going to heal yourself and move forward.
If anyone has any questions, they're welcome to contact us at the email address in the description below.